Captain Sarah Chen sat in the briefing room at Camp Pendleton, her flight suit replaced by administrative khakis. The transition had been brutal, from piloting an AC-130 gunship to processing supply requisitions. 6 months ago, she'd been grounded after a controversial mission over Helmand province. The official report called it reckless deviation from engagement protocols. Her unofficial diagnosis, severe TBI from the hydraulic explosion that had torn through her cockpit during extract. The morning had started like every other since her demotion. She'd arrived at the logistics office at 05:30, reviewed inventory reports, and prepared briefing materials for officers who barely acknowledged her presence. The work was mind-numbing, but Chen approached it with the same precision she'd once applied to calculating firing solutions at 12,000 feet. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Brennan entered the room with his characteristic swagger, flanked by 2 junior officers, Captain Derek Walsh and Lieutenant Jamie Morrison. Brennan was old guard, a career logistics officer who'd never seen combat but wore his rank like armor. He didn't acknowledge Chen's presence at first, directing his attention to the male logistics NCO across the table, Staff Sergeant Kevin Martinez. "Martinez, good work on the ammunition audit. I knew I could count on you." Brennan's voice carried that particular tone of approval, reserved for those he considered worthy. Then, almost as an afterthought, he turned toward Chen. "Captain Chen, I need the ammunition inventory reports by 1600. Can you handle that, or is it too complicated?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. Chen had written the battalion's current inventory protocols, had redesigned the tracking system that cut processing time by 40%. But Brennan asked the question as if he were assigning remedial work to a struggling recruit. She didn't flinch. Her detachment training from years of combat sorties kicked in, the same mental discipline that allowed her to calculate firing solutions while taking enemy fire, the same focus that let her ignore alarms screaming in her headset while she lined up shots that meant the difference between life and death for men on the ground. "Yes, sir. I'll have them ready." Brennan's eyes narrowed, studying her face as if looking for weakness. "You know, I still don't understand how someone who supposedly flew combat missions ends up shuffling papers. Makes me wonder if you were ever really up there." He paused deliberately, letting his gaze drift over her slight frame. "Or if someone just felt sorry for you because of, well, you know." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Captain Walsh shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Lieutenant Morrison stared at his boots. Chen's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but her voice remained level. "The reports will be on your desk by 1600, sir. See that they are." Brennan turned back to Martinez. "Staff Sergeant, walk with me. I want to discuss the next quarter's procurement strategy. Real logistics work." As they left, Martinez glanced back at Chen with an apologetic expression. She gave him the slightest nod. It wasn't his fault. The door closed, leaving her alone in the briefing room with the weight of Brennan's words settling on her shoulders. What Brennan didn't see, what he never bothered to look for, was the faint scar pattern along Chen's left forearm. Partially concealed by her sleeve, the marks formed coordinates 34.052 degree N, 62.22 B3DE, the Helmand extraction zone. Below them, barely visible, was a small tattoo modification, a stylized phoenix with 3 talon marks. Operation Phoenix variant, TSCI clearance. One of 12 pilots ever selected for a program so classified that its existence was known to fewer than 100 people in the entire Department of Defense. Chen rolled down her sleeve and returned to her desk in the corner of the logistics bay, a workspace barely larger than a storage closet, with a single computer and stacks of requisition forms. Through the window she could see the flight line, where C-130s and helicopters came and went throughout the day. Each one was a reminder of what she'd lost. The morning dragged on with mindless administrative tasks. She processed supply requests, updated inventory databases, and responded to emails from officers who'd never bothered to learn her name. At 1100, she took her lunch alone in the chow hall, sitting at a corner table with a book she wasn't really reading. That's when she overheard the conversation. 3 young Marines sat 2 tables over, their voices carrying in the half-empty cafeteria. One of them, a lance corporal with a fresh deployment patch, was talking about a recent mission in Syria. "And our air support just disappeared, man. We were calling for danger close, but the birds wouldn't come in under 200 meters. Taliban had us pinned for 3 hours before the QRF showed up." "That's just how it is now," another Marine said. "Pilots won't take risks anymore. Too worried about their careers." Chen's grip tightened on her fork, but she kept her eyes on her book. "I heard there was one pilot, though," the first Marine continued. "Female AC-130 gunner back in 23. Supposedly came in at like 25 meters during a SEAL SEAL extraction. Saved a whole firebase. Bullshit, the third Marine scoffed. No way that's real. Women can't even pass the physical requirements for most combat roles, let alone fly gunships. I'm telling you, man, I heard it from a guy in 3rd SEAL team. You heard a story, the skeptic interrupted, probably exaggerated. You know how these things get blown out of proportion. Chen stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. The Marines glanced her way briefly, then returned to their conversation, not recognizing the woman in khakis as anyone important. She dumped her tray and walked out, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. Back in her office, she pulled out her phone and scrolled through old photos. There was one from her last mission, taken by her weapons systems officer, Commander Lisa Rodriguez, showing Chen in her flight suit, helmet under her arm, standing in front of Widow 6-1. The AC-130's nose art featured a black widow spider with the number 61 stenciled beneath it. Chen's call sign, Widow, earned not for any dark personality trait, but for her uncanny ability to eliminate threats without collateral damage. Clean kills, surgical precision. She put the phone away and forced herself to focus on the inventory reports. That evening, Chen sat alone in her quarters at the bachelor officer quarters, reviewing the same medical reports she'd read 100 times. The TBI symptoms were real and documented. Occasional vertigo triggered by rapid head movements, processing delays when dealing with multiple simultaneous audio inputs, sensitivity to rapid visual stimuli like strobe lights or quick camera cuts. None of it showed on her face during the day. She'd learned to compartmentalize, to function through the static in her head the same way she'd learned to fly through thunderstorms and enemy fire. But the symptoms were there. She'd noticed them during the mandatory neurological assessment after the injury, the way her balance faltered during the tandem walk test, the half-second delay in processing complex verbal instructions, the headaches that struck without warning and lasted for hours. The flight surgeon had been apologetic but firm. Captain Chen, I can't clear you for combat flight operations with these symptoms. The risk is too high, not just to you, but to your crew and the people you're supporting. She'd argued. She'd shown him her perfect scores on the simulator runs, demonstrated her ability to compensate for the processing delays, proved that her hands were as steady as ever. But regulations were regulations, and the flight surgeon had a job to do. The worst part wasn't losing her wings. It was the suspicion that came after, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the way senior officers looked at her file with barely concealed skepticism, as if her injury were somehow suspect, as if a woman claiming combat-related TBI was inherently less credible than a man. Her phone buzzed. A text from Commander Rodriguez, her former weapons systems officer. Heard Brennan's been running his mouth again. You good? Chen typed back. Just doing my job. That's not what I asked. Chen stared at the message, then set the phone down without responding. What could she say? That some days she felt like a ghost haunting the place where her career used to be. That she lay awake at night replaying that mission over Helmand, wondering if she could have done something differently that would have let her keep flying. Instead, she pulled out a notebook, old school paper and pen, and started writing. It was something her therapist at the VA had suggested, journaling to process the transition from combat to garrison life. Chen had resisted at first, seeing it as soft, as weakness, but she'd eventually given in, if only to have somewhere to put the thoughts that circled endlessly in her head. March 15th, 2023. That's the date everything changed. Not because of the injury, I've had injuries before, but because I made a choice that I knew would cost me everything, and I made it anyway. She paused, pen hovering over the paper. 381 people. That's how many we extracted that night. I remember every number. 247 SEALs, 89 Afghan commandos, 45 support personnel. I remember their faces on the thermal imaging, clustered in defensive positions while tracer fire stitched patterns across the compound. I remember Rodriguez's voice in my headset. Widow, we're Winchester on missiles, switching to guns. I remember the moment I realized that standard engagement protocols, the 100-meter minimum separation, would get them all killed, and I remember making the call. Chen closed the notebook. The therapist said the journaling was supposed to help, but all it did was bring everything back into sharp focus. She changed into her PT gear and went for a run on the base perimeter road. It was after 2100, dark except for the street lights and the glow from the flight line. Her pace was steady, but not fast. She'd learned to avoid the jarring impacts that triggered her vertigo. 5 miles at a measured pace, breathing controlled, mind focused on the rhythm of her footfalls. As she ran, she passed the static displays near the base museum, old aircraft from previous eras, their weapons long since removed, their glory days reduced to photo opportunities for tourists and new recruits, an F-4 Phantom, an A-4 Skyhawk, and there, at the far end, an AC-130 gunship, an older model than the one she'd flown, but close enough to make her chest tighten. She stopped in front of it, hands on her hips, breathing hard. The aircraft loomed in the darkness, its side-mounted guns pointed toward empty sky. Chen reached out and touched the fuselage, metal cool under her palm. "I miss you," she whispered, then immediately felt foolish for talking to a decommissioned aircraft. But the truth was there in those words. She missed the weight of the helmet, the hum of the engines, the way the entire aircraft shuddered when the 105mm howitzer fired. She missed the controlled chaos of combat operations, the absolute clarity of purpose, the knowledge that her skills were being used at their highest level to keep people alive. She missed mattering. Chen finished her run and returned to her quarters. She showered, set her alarm for 0500, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by fragments of dreams where she was back in the cockpit, alarms screaming, Rodriguez calling out targets, the world reduced to mathematics and muscle memory and split-second decisions. The next morning brought more of the same. Inventory reports, supply requisitions, the steady rhythm of garrison work that felt like drowning in slow motion. At 0900, she had a meeting with the battalion supply officer to discuss procurement timelines. At 1100, she reviewed ammunition storage protocols with a group of junior enlisted Marines who treated her with careful, uncomfortable politeness, the kind reserved for officers nobody quite knows what to do with. At 1300, Lieutenant Colonel Brennan called her to his office. She knocked once and entered to find him seated behind his desk, reviewing paperwork. He didn't look up immediately, letting her stand at attention while he finished whatever he was reading. It was a power play, minor but deliberate. "Captain Chen," he finally said, setting down his pen, "I've been reviewing your personnel file." "Yes, sir. I'm concerned about your long-term fit within this battalion." Brennan leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting he was doing her a favor by being direct. "Your background is in aviation, not logistics. You don't seem particularly engaged with the work, and frankly, your presence raises questions." "Questions, sir? About whether the Marine Corps is the right place for someone with your limitations." He gestured vaguely at her head. "TBI is serious. Maybe it's time to consider medical separation. Start the next chapter of your life." Chen's hands clenched behind her back, but her voice remained steady. "Sir, I'm fit for duty within my medical restrictions. My work performance has been satisfactory." "Satisfactory isn't the standard we hold officers to, Captain. We expect excellence. And I'm not seeing excellence from you. What I'm seeing is someone going through the motions, waiting for something that isn't going to happen." He picked up a document from his desk. "I'm recommending you for separation review. It's the right thing for you and for the Corps." The words landed like physical blows, but Chen kept her face neutral. "Is there anything else, sir?" "That's all." "Dismissed." She saluted, turned on her heel, and walked out of his office with her spine straight and her eyes forward. She made it to the bathroom before her hands started shaking. Standing at the sink, Chen splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her had the same features, dark eyes, strong jaw, hair pulled back in a regulation bun. But something fundamental had changed. The confidence that had carried her through flight school, through combat missions, through every challenge the Marine Corps had thrown at her. It was fracturing. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Rodriguez. "Lunch today?" Chen typed back. "Can't. Swamped with work." The truth was, she couldn't face Rodriguez right now. Couldn't face the questions about how she was doing, the sympathy in her old crew members' eyes, the unspoken knowledge that Chen's career was effectively over while Rodriguez was already back in the cockpit with a new pilot. She dried her face, straightened her uniform, and walked back to her office. There was work to do, even if that work felt meaningless, even if every day felt like slowly disappearing. What Captain Sarah Chen didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that 3 weeks earlier, a personnel file with her name on it had crossed the desk of Vice Admiral James Hendricks at the Pentagon, and the Admiral, who had spent 30 years learning to recognize the difference between administrative noise and genuine injustice, had started asking questions. The machinery of investigation was already in motion. It just hadn't reached Camp Pendleton yet. Part 2. The Catalyst. 12:15 minutes. Vice Admiral James Hendricks had been conducting routine audits of Special Operations personnel files when a discrepancy caught his attention. It was subtle, the kind of thing that would slip past most reviewers. But Hendricks had built his career on noticing what others missed. The file belonged to Captain Sarah Chen, AC-130 gunship pilot, 40 37 combat missions, multiple decorations including 2 air medals with Valor. Phoenix variant qualified, a designation that made Hendricks sit up straighter in his chair. Only 12 pilots in the entire military had ever been selected for that program, and their names were closely guarded secrets even within the special operations community. But here was Captain Chen, Phoenix variant qualified, now assigned to battalion logistics at Camp Pendleton. The official reason: medical grounding due to traumatic brain injury sustained in combat. The last entry in her personnel file was a recommendation for separation review, submitted by Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Brennan. Hendricks pulled up the mission report from March 15, 2023. Call sign Widow 61, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. SEAL Team 3 extraction under heavy enemy fire. The report was clinical in its language, documenting protocol violations with careful precision. Pilot deviated from approved engagement parameters on multiple occasions. Conducted 30mm gun runs at distances ranging from 15 to 35 meters from friendly forces. Minimum safe distance per ROE is 100 meters. Recommend disciplinary action for reckless endangerment. But buried in the appendices was another document. The after-action report from SEAL Team 3's commander, a full bird captain named Michael Reeves. Hendricks read it twice, then picked up his phone. "Get me Captain Reeves at Nest WG-1, he told his aide. "Tell him it's regarding Operation Bright Angel." 20 minutes later, Reeves was on a secure line. "Admiral Hendricks, sir. I wasn't expecting to hear from you directly." "Captain Reeves, I'm reviewing a mission file from March 2023, Helmand Province, firebase Phoenix. You were the ground commander for the extraction." There was a pause. "Yes, sir. That was a hell of a night. Tell me about the air support." "Sir, I don't know what the official report says, but I'll tell you what happened on the ground. We were overrun. Taliban had us surrounded on 3 sides, mortars dropping every 30 seconds, small arms fire so thick you couldn't see through it. We had 381 people in that firebase: SEALs, Afghan commandos, support personnel, even some CIA guys. No way to extract without air support, but the LZ was hot. Too hot for standard protocols." And Widow 61, Reeves's voice changed, became fierce. "That pilot saved every single life in that compound, sir. She came in at danger close, and I mean danger close, rounds landing close enough that we felt the concussion. She threaded shots between our positions and enemy concentrations with accuracy I've never seen before or since. We're talking 30mm rounds impacting 15-20 meters from our lines, clearing paths for extract. She took heavy fire. Aircraft got hit multiple times, and she never wavered, not once. The mission report says she violated engagement protocols." "Yes, sir, she did. Because following protocols would have gotten us all killed. That pilot made a choice, and I thank God every day that she made it. My men are alive because of her." Reeves paused. "Sir, I submitted a recommendation for the Distinguished Flying Cross." "What happened to it?" "Blocked by her chain of command due to the protocol violations." "That's..." Reeves bit off whatever he'd been about to say. "Sir, with respect, that's bullshit. That pilot deserves a medal, not a grounding." "I'm inclined to agree with you, Captain, which is why I'm going to be visiting Camp Pendleton next week. Thank you for your candor." Hendricks hung up and made 3 more calls: to the Special Operations Command Surgeon General, to the Phoenix Variant Program Director, and to the Inspector General's office. Then he pulled up Lieutenant Colonel Brennan's personnel file and started reading. What he found troubled him deeply. The inspection visit to Camp Pendleton was scheduled as part of broader readiness reviews, but Hendricks had a specific agenda. He arrived on a Tuesday morning with minimal fanfare, just his aide, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park, and 2 NCIS investigators who'd been briefed to keep a low profile. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan greeted them at the battalion headquarters with practiced professionalism, presenting operational readiness reports and offering a detailed facilities tour. He was competent, professional, and gave no indication that he knew anything was amiss. "Admiral, we run a tight ship here. Accountability, efficiency, and maintaining standards are my priorities." Brennan handed over a briefing folder. "Our supply readiness metrics are above battalion average, and we've reduced procurement processing time by 15% over the last quarter." "Impressive," Hendricks said neutrally. "I'd like to see your personnel operations as well, starting with your officer roster." "Of course, sir. We have a strong team. Captain Walsh handles procurement, Lieutenant Morrison oversees transportation, and Staff Sergeant Martinez is my senior enlisted logistics advisor." Brennan walked them through the organizational chart, highlighting each officer's achievements and responsibilities. "And Captain Chen?" Hendricks asked casually. Brennan's expression flickered, just for for a moment. Captain Chen handles administrative supply processing. She came to us from Aviation, medical grounding. We've tried to find appropriate work within her capabilities. I see. I'd like to meet with her. Sir, I'm not sure she'd be relevant to your operational assessment. Her role is fairly limited. Nevertheless, Captain, I'd like to speak with her. Let's say 1400 hours in a private conference room. Brennan couldn't refuse a direct request from a flag officer, but his discomfort was evident. Of course, sir. I'll have her available. At 13:45, Chen received the summons. She'd been working on quarterly projections when Staff Sergeant Martinez appeared at her office door, looking uncomfortable. Ma'am, you've been requested for a meeting with Admiral Hendricks at 1400, conference room B. Chen felt her stomach drop. Did he say why? No, ma'am, just that he wants to speak with you. She checked her uniform in the bathroom mirror. Everything was in order, but her mind raced through possibilities. Was this about the separation review? Had Brennan expedited it somehow? Was she about to be formally notified of her discharge? At exactly 1400, she knocked on the conference room door and entered to find Admiral Hendricks seated across from an empty chair, Lieutenant Commander Park standing by the door. The Admiral was in his late 50s, with steel-gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent years at sea. His expression was unreadable. Captain Chen, thank you for meeting with me. Please sit down. Hendricks gestured to the chair. I've been reviewing some mission files from your time with the 4th Special Operations Squadron, specifically Operation Phoenix Variant. Chen felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained steady. Sir, I'm not at liberty to discuss classified operations. Of course not, but I can discuss them. Hendricks opened a folder. Phoenix Variant is a classified precision strike program under JSOC. Acceptance rate is approximately 2%. Training involves extreme close air support scenarios with collateral damage tolerances under 0.5%. Graduates are qualified for TSCI operations requiring surgical precision in complex urban environments. You were selected in 2021, completed the program with distinction, and were subsequently assigned to the 4th SOS for operational deployment. Chen's shoulders straightened unconsciously. Hearing someone else state her qualifications, really state them with understanding of what they meant, triggered something in her that had been dormant for months. Yes, sir. On March 15, 2023, you were piloting Widow 6-1, providing close air support for SEAL Team 3 during a high-value target extraction at Firebase Phoenix. Your orders were to maintain a minimum engagement distance of 100 meters. According to the mission report, you violated that parameter multiple times. Hendricks paused, watching her face. The report says you conducted 30mm gun runs at an average distance of 25 meters from friendly forces, some passes as close as 15 meters. Danger close by any definition. Chen's jaw tightened. Yes, sir. The report also says you extracted 381 SEALs and support personnel from an overrun firebase with 0 friendly casualties. 0. Hendricks let that sink in. I've spoken with Captain Reeves, the ground commander. He tells me that following standard protocols would have resulted in mass casualties. He also tells me you took 17 hits to your aircraft during that mission, including a hydraulic explosion that caused your TBI. Is that accurate? Yes, sir. The hydraulic line ruptured during our 4th gun run. Fragments penetrated the cockpit. I sustained a head injury and a compound fracture of my left wrist. Commander Rodriguez, my WSO, took over navigation while I continued flying. You continued flying, Hendricks repeated, with a traumatic brain injury and a fractured wrist. The mission wasn't complete, sir. We had 3 more gun runs to execute before the extract helicopters could land safely. How long did the mission last after your injury? Approximately 40 minutes, sir. Hendricks was silent for a long moment. Captain Chen, I've been in the Navy for 30 years. I've seen exceptional pilots, courageous pilots, skilled pilots. What I'm reading in this file, this is something different. This is someone who understood that the rules existed for good reasons, but also understood when following those rules would cause more harm than breaking them. Someone who made an impossible decision and then executed it flawlessly under conditions that would have broken most people. Chen felt something shift in her chest, a pressure she'd been carrying for months beginning to ease. What the report doesn't explain, Hendricks continued, is why that decision resulted in your grounding and subsequent burial in a logistics role. What it doesn't explain is why a pilot with your qualifications is processing supply forms instead of training the next generation of KS pilots. What it doesn't explain is why your chain of command recommended you for separation review instead of recognition. He slid a photograph across the table. It showed Chen's AC-130 from below, captured during the extraction. The 30mm cannon ports were clearly visible, as was the significant damage to the tail tail section and fuselage. I've also been reviewing your current situation, Captain. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan has submitted a personnel review recommending your separation from service. He cites questionable fitness for duty and unclear combat credentials. Does that characterization seem accurate to you? Chen's hands clenched in her lap. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. Sir, Colonel Brennan has made his opinion clear from the day I arrived at this battalion. He doesn't believe women belong in combat roles. He especially doesn't think a woman with a TBI belongs in uniform at all. He's questioned my service record, implied that my credentials are fabricated or exaggerated, and treated me as if I'm a problem to be managed rather than an asset to be utilized. He's not wrong that I have limitations now. I do. The TBI symptoms are real, but my capabilities have never been unclear. They've been inconvenient. The words came out in a rush. Months of frustration and humiliation finally finding voice. Chen immediately regretted her candor. You didn't criticize your commanding officer to a flag officer, no matter what the circumstances, but Hendrix's expression didn't change. Show me your left forearm, Captain. Chen hesitated, then rolled up her sleeve. The coordinates and Phoenix tattoo were clearly visible in the conference room light. Hendrix studied the markings. 34.0522 north, 62.2053 east. Firebase Phoenix coordinates, and the Phoenix with 3 Talon marks. Phoenix variant qualification indicator. Program graduates are authorized to bear that marking as a permanent identification measure. He looked up at her. Do you know why I'm here, Captain? No, sir. I'm here because your file crossed my desk 3 weeks ago, and something about it didn't make sense. A Phoenix variant pilot, one of 12 in the entire military, sidelined for a protocol violation that saved hundreds of lives. A decorated combat veteran recommended for separation by a logistics officer who's never seen combat. A woman whose service is being questioned by people who've never done a tenth of what she's done. Hendrix's voice was quiet but intense. I'm here because the system failed you, Captain Chen, and I'm here to start correcting that failure. Chen felt her throat tighten. Sir, I don't understand. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need an honest answer. If you were cleared to fly again, if the TBI symptoms could be managed, if you had the right support and accommodations, would you want to return to flight operations? The question hung in the air. Chen thought about the months of silence, the slow erosion of her identity, the way she'd learned to expect nothing because expecting anything only led to disappointment. Every day, sir, she finally said, her voice rough, but I understand my limitations. I understand the regulations. I understand that some doors close and don't open again. Regulations, Hendrix said, are written to protect capability, not destroy it. When they do the opposite, they need to be questioned. He closed the folder. Tomorrow morning at 800, I'm conducting a battalion formation. I'd like you to be there. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Good. And Captain, don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in that uniform. You've earned it 100 times over. After Chen left, Lieutenant Commander Park spoke up. Sir, Brennan is going to be furious when he realizes what's happening. Good, Hendrix said. He should be. He's failed in every way that matters as a leader. Tomorrow, that failure becomes public. That evening, Chen sat in her quarters, trying to process what had happened. She pulled out her phone and finally responded to Rodriguez's earlier text. Can you talk? The response came within seconds. Give me 5 minutes. When her phone rang, Chen picked up immediately. Okay, what the hell is going on? Rodriguez demanded. I just got a call from someone at SOCOM asking questions about the Helmand extraction. They wanted details about your injuries, about how you flew after the hydraulic explosion, about Sarah. What's happening? I don't know, Chen admitted. An admiral showed up, started asking questions about Phoenix, about the mission, about Brennan's recommendation for my separation. Holy shit! Which admiral? Hendrix. Vice Admiral James Hendrix. Rodriguez whistled. Sarah, do you know who that is? He's the deputy commander of Naval Special Warfare. He doesn't show up at random logistics battalions to ask questions. If he's involved, something big is happening. He wants me at a battalion formation tomorrow morning. I think he's going to say something about the mission, about what actually happened. It's about damn time, Rodriguez said fiercely. That mission should have earned you a medal, not a grounding. Everyone in the squadron knew it. We all saw what you did. But the protocols, fuck the protocols, Sarah. You saved 381 lives. That matters more than any regulation. And anyone who can't see that shouldn't be wearing the uniform. They talked for another hour, Rodriguez filling her in on squadron gossip, on who was flying where, on the new pilots coming through training. It was the first time in months that Chen felt connected to her old life, to the community she'd been part of before everything changed. When they finally hung up, Chen felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Fragile, tentative, but there. She set her alarm for 0500 and tried to sleep, but her mind kept kept returning to the Admiral's words. You've earned it 100 times over. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow would bring either vindication or final confirmation that her career was over. Either way, at least she'd know. Part 3. The confrontation. 14-16 minutes. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystal clarity that felt symbolic. Chen woke at 0500, ran her usual 5 miles despite her nerves, and spent extra time on her uniform. If today was going to be some kind of reckoning, she'd face it looking like a Marine. At 0730, she arrived at the parade ground to find chaos in progress. The entire battalion was being assembled, not just logistics personnel, but also the combat support companies, administrative staff, even personnel from adjacent units. This wasn't a routine formation. This was something bigger. Staff Sergeant Martinez found her near the rear ranks. Ma'am, you know what this is about? No idea, Staff Sergeant. Scuttlebutt says there's an admiral on base. People are saying someone's getting relieved of command. His eyes flicked toward the platform where Lieutenant Colonel Brennan stood with Captain Walsh and Lieutenant Morrison, all looking uncomfortable. You hear anything? Nothing concrete. The formation was called to attention at precisely 0800. Admiral Hendricks stepped onto the platform, flanked by Lieutenant Commander Park and the 2 NCIS investigators Chen had seen the day before. The Admiral's presence alone was enough to make the entire battalion straighten their spines. Good morning. I'm Vice Admiral James Hendricks, Deputy Commander of Naval Special Warfare. I'm here conducting readiness reviews across multiple installations. His voice carried across the parade ground without need for amplification. What I've found at this battalion concerns me deeply. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan's face had gone carefully neutral, but Chen could see the tension in his shoulders. I found a pilot with one of the highest mission success rates in Special Operations history, assigned to process supply forms. I found a combat veteran with top-secret controlled information clearance, treated as though her service was somehow questionable. I found a decorated officer recommended for separation review based on criteria that have nothing to do with her actual capabilities. Hendricks paused, letting his words sink in. I found a failure of leadership at multiple levels. The formation was completely silent. Chen stood rigidly at attention, her heart pounding so hard she was certain people around her could hear it. 6 months ago, Captain Sarah Chen. Hendricks gestured toward her, and hundreds of heads turned to look. Piloted an AC-130 gunship during a SEAL team extraction in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. The mission was designated Operation Bright Angel, and it involved extracting 381 American and Allied personnel from an overrun firebase under heavy enemy fire. Chen felt the weight of every eye in the battalion. Marines who'd passed her in the hallways without a second glance were now staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to skepticism. The tactical situation was dire. Taliban forces had surrounded the firebase on 3 sides. Mortar fire was impacting every 30 seconds. Small arms fire was so intense that standard extraction was impossible. Captain Chen and her crew were providing close air support, but the firebase's proximity to enemy positions made engagement extremely difficult. Hendricks pulled out a tablet showing tactical diagrams that were projected on a screen behind him. Standard rules of engagement require a minimum separation of 100 meters between air-delivered fires and friendly forces. This is a crucial safety measure designed to prevent friendly fire casualties. It's written in blood, learned from decades of hard lessons. The Admiral's voice hardened, but Captain Chen assessed that following standard protocols would result in mass casualties. The enemy was too close, the firebase too compromised. So she made a decision that I suspect haunts her to this day. She violated direct orders and conducted precision gun runs at distances ranging from 15 to 35 meters from friendly positions. Murmurs rippled through the formation. Chen kept her eyes forward, barely breathing. 25 meters average distance. That means 30 millimeters high explosive rounds impacting close enough that our own people could feel the concussion. Close enough that a single miscalculation, a momentary loss of focus, a fraction of a degree error in targeting would have killed Americans instead of saving them. Hendricks advanced the tactical display, showing gun camera footage from the mission. The grainy thermal imagery showed tracer fire, explosions, and the precise impact points of the AC-130's cannon fire, threading between friendly and enemy positions with impossible accuracy. Captain Chen conducted 17 gun runs over 47 47 minutes. During that time, her aircraft took 17 hits from enemy fire. On the fourth run, a 12.7mm round penetrated the cockpit and struck a hydraulic line. The resulting explosion showered the flight deck with superheated fluid and metal fragments. Captain Chen sustained a traumatic brain injury, a compound fracture of her left wrist, and second-degree burns on her right shoulder. The footage continued playing, showing the aircraft's erratic movements after the hit, then stabilizing as Chen regained control. She continued flying, continued engaging, completed 13 more gun runs with a fractured wrist, a head injury, and burns across her shoulder. Her weapons systems officer, Commander Lisa Rodriguez, took over navigation and communications, while Captain Chen focused purely on flying and shooting. Hendricks turned to face the formation directly. The result of Captain Chen's decision to break protocol: 381 Americans and Allied personnel extracted safely, 0 friendly casualties from air-delivered fires, 0 friendly casualties from enemy fire during the extraction window that her suppression created. Perfect precision under impossible conditions. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. For this action, SEAL Team 3's commander submitted a recommendation for the Distinguished Flying Cross. That recommendation was blocked by Captain Chen's chain of command, citing the protocol violations. Instead of recognition, Captain Chen was grounded, medically disqualified from flight operations due to her combat injuries, and eventually assigned to this battalion where her skills and experience have been systematically devalued. Brennan had gone pale. Several Marines in formation were now openly staring at Chen, their earlier skepticism replaced by something approaching awe. "Let me be very clear about something," Hendricks said, his voice cutting. "Captain Chen didn't break protocol because she was reckless. She broke protocol because she understood something that every combat leader must eventually learn. Rules exist to serve the mission and protect the people executing it. When following rules would accomplish neither, when following rules would instead guarantee the deaths of hundreds of Americans, then breaking those rules becomes not just acceptable but necessary." The Admiral pulled out another document. Captain Chen was one of 12 pilots selected for Operation Phoenix Variant, a classified precision strike program with an acceptance rate of approximately 2%. To qualify, pilots must demonstrate the ability to deliver ordnance in complex urban environments with collateral damage tolerances under 0.5%. They must execute danger-close missions with pinpoint accuracy under high-stress conditions. It is the most demanding precision strike training in the U.S. military. He looked directly at Brennan now, his expression hard. "Lieutenant Colonel, you submitted a personnel review 3 weeks ago recommending Captain Chen's separation from service. You cited questionable fitness for duty and, I'm quoting directly here, unclear combat credentials. In your professional opinion, what part of Captain Chen's record is unclear?" Brennan struggled to respond, his face flushed. "Sir, the protocol violations raised questions about judgment, and given her current medical status, I felt it was appropriate to—" "Her medical status," Hendricks interrupted, his voice like ice, "is a traumatic brain injury sustained in combat while saving American lives. A Purple Heart qualifying injury. As for judgment, let's examine that." Captain Chen assessed a tactical situation, calculated that standard procedures would fail, implemented an alternative solution requiring extraordinary skill, and achieved a perfect outcome. "That's not poor judgment, Lieutenant Colonel. That's exceptional judgment under pressure." The Admiral turned back to address the full formation. "But here's what troubles me most. Since arriving at this battalion, Captain Chen has been subjected to persistent questions about whether she ever really flew combat missions, whether she earned her position or received special treatment because of her gender, whether her combat record is somehow fabricated or exaggerated." His voice rose slightly. "Let me address that directly, because this is important. There are currently 247 female pilots in Marine Corps Aviation. Of those, 89 are qualified for combat operations. Captain Chen was not only combat qualified, she was Phoenix Variant qualified. She flew 47 combat missions. She has personal decorations including 2 Air Medals with Valor, a Navy Commendation Medal with Combat V, and a Purple Heart. Her kill count, enemy combatants eliminated through direct action, exceeds that of most infantry officers." Hendricks pulled up his sleeve, revealing his own forearm. There, barely visible, was a small tattoo of a trident, the SEAL insignia. "I earned this in 1992 after completing Bud S. It represents years of training, countless hours of preparation, and a commitment to excellence that defined my career." Captain Chen earned her Phoenix tattoo the same way, through demonstrated excellence excellence under the most demanding conditions imaginable. He lowered his sleeve. Gender has nothing to do with capability. Gender has nothing to do with courage. Gender has nothing to do with the ability to make life and death decisions under fire. What matters is skill, training, experience, and the willingness to do whatever is necessary to bring Americans home alive. Captain Chen has demonstrated all of those qualities. The question isn't whether she belongs in uniform. The question is why anyone would doubt it. The formation was absolutely silent now. Chen felt tears threatening behind her eyes, but kept her composure, kept her face neutral. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan, Hendricks said, turning back to the battalion commander, you failed to apply the most basic principle of military leadership, extreme ownership. You failed to understand the capabilities of your personnel. You failed to utilize those capabilities effectively. You failed to protect a subordinate who had already sacrificed more than most of us ever will. And most significantly, you allowed personal biases to cloud your professional judgment. Brennan stood rigid, his jaw clenched. Effective immediately, you are relieved of command pending investigation into your personnel management practices. Captain Walsh will assume temporary command of this battalion. NCIS will be conducting interviews regarding equal opportunity violations and potential misconduct. Hendricks's tone was final. You are dismissed, Lieutenant Colonel. Report to the base legal office. Brennan saluted stiffly, then walked off the platform without meeting anyone's eyes. The battalion watched him go in stunned silence. Hendricks waited until Brennan had left the parade ground before continuing. To everyone else in this formation, this isn't just about one officer's failure. This is about systemic issues in how we recognize capability, how we support wounded warriors, and how we ensure that every service member, regardless of gender, regardless of injury status, is valued for what they can contribute. He looked directly at Chen. Captain Chen, front and center. Chen marched forward on legs that felt like they might give out, stopping at attention before the Admiral. Up close, she could see the weather lines around his eyes, the combat ribbons on his uniform, the weight of decades of service in his bearing. Captain, I'm not here to offer you your wings back. That's a medical and administrative process that will take time, and it depends on whether your TBI symptoms can be effectively managed. What I am here to do is ensure that your service is recognized accurately, that you receive the support you've earned, and that you have a say in what comes next for your career. His voice softened slightly. I'm also here to ask you a question in front of your battalion. Not what the regulations say you can have, not what you think you're supposed to say. What do you actually want? Chen's throat was tight. Around her, hundreds of Marines were watching, listening. She thought about the months of silence, the slow erasure of her identity, the way she'd learned to expect nothing, but standing here with an admiral who actually understood what she'd done, what she'd sacrificed, what she was capable of. Standing here with her service finally recognized, she realized she owed it to herself to be honest. Sir, I want to fly again. That's what I want more than anything. Her voice steadied, but I also understand that might not be possible. The TBI symptoms are real, and even if I never fly combat missions again, I need to know that what I did mattered, that the 381 people who came home because I made that choice, that they mattered more than the protocol I broke. They did matter, Captain. They matter more than any regulation ever written. Hendricks paused. But there's something else, isn't there? Something beyond flying. Chen nodded slowly. Yes, sir. I want to make sure that other people in my position, combat veterans dealing with TBI, PTSD, physical injuries, don't get lost in the system. I want to help them transition, get proper treatment, and find ways to continue serving if they're capable. Because right now, sir, that system is broken. I've lived it. I've seen how easy it is to go from valued asset to discarded problem, and I want to fix that. Then that's what we're going to do. Hendricks's voice carried across the parade ground. Effective immediately, Captain Chen is reassigned to work with the Warrior Transition Unit at Balboa Naval Medical Center. Her mandate is to develop support protocols for special operations personnel dealing with combat-related injuries. She will have full access to resources, direct reporting to my office, and the authority to implement necessary changes. He turned back to face the formation. This battalion, this Marine Corps, this military, we are only as strong as our ability to take care of our people, not just when they're healthy and deployable, but when they're wounded, when they're transitioning, when they need us most. Captain Chen has taken care of us. Now it's our turn to take care of her and everyone like her. The Admiral looked at Chen one more time. Anything you want to say to your battalion, Captain? Chen turned to face the hundreds of faces staring at her, some skeptical, some awed, some uncertain. She thought about all the carefully crafted speeches she could give, all the ways she could explain herself or defend her actions. Instead, she kept it simple. I did my job, that's all. When the moment came, I made the call I thought would save the most lives, and I executed it to the best of my ability. That's what we're all supposed to do. Every Marine, every day. Make the hard calls and live with the consequences. She paused. The consequences for me were medical grounding and a TBI I'll deal with for the rest of my life. But 381 people went home to their families. That's not a trade I regret. Her voice strengthened. To anyone here dealing with combat injuries, dealing with PTSD, dealing with the feeling that you don't belong anymore because you can't do what you used to do, you still matter. Your experience matters. Your service matters. Don't let anyone tell you different. The formation was silent for a long moment. Then, from somewhere in the ranks, a single Marine started clapping, then another, then dozens. Within seconds, the entire formation was applauding, a breach of protocol, but nobody moved to stop it. Chen stood at attention, tears finally sliding down her cheeks, as hundreds of Marines acknowledged what she'd done, what she'd sacrificed, what she still was despite everything. Admiral Hendricks waited for the applause to fade, then gave the command. Battalion, dismissed. As the formation broke up, Marines approached Chen from all directions. The senior enlisted SEAL from her first day in the Chow Hall was one of the first. She hadn't recognized him out of uniform, but he clearly remembered her. Ma'am, I was at Firebase Phoenix, third chalk out during the extraction. I wouldn't be here without you. His voice cracked. Thank you. Thank you for making that call. Others came forward with similar stories. SEALs who'd been at the Firebase, Marines who'd heard the stories and hadn't believed them, junior officers who'd been inspired by her example. Chen shook hands, accepted thanks, and tried to process the emotional whiplash of going from forgotten and discarded to publicly honored in the span of 20 minutes. Staff Sergeant Martinez appeared beside her as the crowd thinned. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. I should have pushed back when the colonel was disrespecting you. I should have said something. You had your own career to protect, Staff Sergeant. I understand. That's no excuse, ma'am. And for what it's worth, you're the best officer I've ever worked with. The way you handled yourself these past months, the professionalism, the dedication even when you were being treated like shit, that's real leadership. After the last of the well-wishers had left, Chen found Admiral Hendricks waiting by his vehicle. Lieutenant Commander Park stood nearby, giving them space. Captain, I want you to understand something, Hendricks said quietly. What happened here today, the recognition, the new assignment, that's just the beginning. You still have a long road ahead. The TBI symptoms aren't going to disappear. The bureaucracy you'll face trying to fix the system is going to be frustrating as hell. And there will still be people who doubt you, who question your capabilities, who think women don't belong in combat roles. I know, sir, but you won't be facing it alone. I meant what I said about direct reporting to my office. You'll have support, resources, and the backing you need to make real changes. He extended his hand. I also want you to know that I'm reopening the recommendation for your Distinguished Flying Cross. It should have been approved the first time. That's on us, not you. Chen shook his hand, unable to speak. One more thing, Hendricks added. I've been in contact with the Special Operations Command Medical Board. They're willing to explore options for limited flight status, not combat operations, but potentially training and evaluation roles. It would require rigorous medical assessment and probably some accommodations for your symptoms, but it's not off the table. Think about whether that's something you want to pursue. Yes, sir. I'd like that very much. Then we'll make it happen. He nodded once, then climbed into his vehicle. Take care of yourself, Captain, and take care of the people who'll be counting on you. As the Admiral's vehicle drove away, Chen stood alone on the parade ground, feeling the morning sun warm on her face. For the first time in months, she felt like herself again. Not the broken version she'd become, but the pilot, the officer, the Marine who'd made an impossible choice and lived with the consequences. Her phone buzzed. Rodriguez. Holy shit, Sarah, the video is everywhere. You're a fucking legend. What video? Someone recorded the Admiral's speech and posted it. It's already got like 50,000 views on Reddit. Everyone's talking about you. Chen groaned. So much for quietly returning to normal life. But as she walked back toward the battalion headquarters to clear out her old office, she found herself smiling despite everything. She'd been seen. Finally, after months of invisibility, someone had looked at her and recognized what she was capable of. That was worth more more than any medal. Part 4. The Resolution. 14-16 minutes. 3 months later, Captain Sarah Chen sat in a conference room at Balboa Naval Medical Center, surrounded by 14 other veterans. The group was more diverse than most military gatherings. Men and women, different branches, different specialties. Some were pilots like her, some were infantry, some were support personnel. What united them was that they all carried invisible wounds from their service, and they'd all been failed by the system that was supposed to take care of them. The program Chen had designed, officially called the Silent Emblem Project, named for the invisible tattoos that marked elite operators, had taken months of bureaucratic warfare to establish. She'd fought with VA administrators who insisted existing programs were sufficient. She'd argued with medical review boards that wanted to standardize treatment protocols for conditions that didn't fit standardized boxes. She'd navigated Pentagon budget committees and explained over and over why peer support from people who actually understood classified operations mattered more than generic counseling. The work had been exhausting, frustrating, and occasionally soul-crushing, but it was working. Okay, let's start with check-ins, Chen said, looking around the circle. How's everyone doing this week? David Torres, a former Marine Scout sniper dealing with severe PTSD, spoke first. Had a rough few days.
Anniversary of my last deployment was this week, and it brought up a lot of shit. But I used the breathing techniques we talked about, called my battle buddy when things got dark. Made it through without falling apart. That's not just making it through, David. That's progress, Chen said. Recognizing triggers, using your tools, reaching out for support. That's exactly what we're trying to build here. Around the circle, others shared their struggles and victories. Commander Lisa Rodriguez was there too, having joined the project as a peer facilitator. She'd taken leave from active flight status to help Chen develop the program, recognizing that the need was too great to ignore. I want to talk about something we've been avoiding, said Captain Jennifer Marks, a former Army helicopter pilot. How do we deal with people questioning whether we were really in combat, especially for those of us who are women? I had someone at the VA office last week basically imply I was exaggerating my service to get benefits. It took everything I had not to lose my shit. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Chen leaned forward. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't hurt, because it does. Having your service questioned, having your sacrifice treated as if it's somehow suspicious just because you don't fit someone's mental image of what a warrior looks like, that cuts deep. She paused. But here's what I've learned over the past few months. You can't control other people's ignorance or bias. What you can control is how you respond to it. Which is what exactly? Torres asked. Because my first response usually involves punching them in the face. A few people laughed, breaking the tension. You document everything, Chen said. Every dismissive comment from a VA rep, every time someone questions your service record, every barrier you face, you document it and report it through appropriate channels. Then you do your job, take care of yourself and your people, and let your record speak for itself. She pulled out a file folder. Since the Silent Emblem Project launched 3 months ago, we've received 247 inquiries from veterans across all branches dealing with combat-related TBI or PTSD. Of those, 89 are women. Every single one of them has faced some form of skepticism or dismissal when trying to access care or benefits. So we're not isolated incidents. This is a systemic problem. What are we doing about it? Marks asked. Multiple things. First, we're partnering with the Inspector General's office to investigate discriminatory practices at VA facilities. Second, we're developing training programs for VA staff on recognizing and properly processing claims from special operations personnel, especially women in combat roles. Third, we're creating a peer advocate network so that every veteran navigating the system has someone who understands the process and can help them fight back when necessary. Rodriguez added, we're also working with SOCOM to establish better transition protocols. Right now, when someone gets medically retired from a classified program, their records are so heavily redacted that VA reps can't even verify their service. We're trying to create a classification level that allows verification without compromising operational security. That's going to take forever, Torres said. Probably, Chen admitted. But we start now, or it never happens. And in the meantime, we take care of each other. That's what this group is for. Peer support from people who actually understand what you're going through, because we've been there ourselves. The session continued for another 90 minutes, covering everything from navigating VA disability claims to therapeutic options for TBI treatment. Chen had connected with specialists at UCSD who were conducting groundbreaking research on brain injury rehabilitation using advanced neuroimaging and targeted interventions. Several members of her group were participating
participating in clinical trials that showed promising results. But the real breakthrough wasn't medical. It was the simple act of not being alone. These veterans, who'd been isolated and struggling, now had a community of people who understood the specific challenges of transitioning from classified special operations to civilian life or garrison duties while carrying invisible wounds. After the session, Chen walked to her new office, still not a cockpit, but a space that felt meaningful. The walls were covered with photographs from group activities, a hiking trip in the mountains, a volunteer day at a homeless veterans shelter, a skills workshop where former operators taught each other coping mechanisms that actually worked. On her desk was a stack of intake forms from new veterans requesting to join the program. Chen picked up the first one and started reading. Name: Captain Maria Santos Branch, Air Force Specialty, Combat Rescue Officer. Reason for inquiry: severe TBI from IED blast during personnel recovery mission. Medical retirement pending. Struggling with loss of identity and purpose. Multiple VA appointments canceled due to insufficient documentation of combat status. Need help navigating system and finding meaning in next chapter. Chen made a note to call Santos personally. She knew exactly how that felt. The disorientation of losing the identity you'd built, the frustration of having your sacrifice questioned, the desperate need to find purpose when everything that defined you had been taken away. Her phone rang. Admiral Hendricks. Captain Chen, I wanted to update you on several matters. First, the investigation into discriminatory practices at 3 VA regional offices has been completed. Multiple staff members have been disciplined, and we're implementing new training protocols. Your documentation was critical to building those cases. That's good news, sir. Second, I have your medical evaluation results from the Flight Status Review Board. They're recommending approval for limited flight status, training and evaluation roles only, with accommodations for your TBI symptoms. You'd be flying again, Sarah. Not combat missions, but real flight operations. Training the next generation of pilots in CAS tactics. Chen's breath caught. She'd hoped, but hadn't let herself believe it was possible. The accommodations would include restrictions on night flying, limits on consecutive flight hours to prevent fatigue-related symptoms, and required co-pilot monitoring during initial return to flight operations. It's not what you had before, but it's a path back into the cockpit. When can I start? Chen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Medical board wants you to complete another 3 months of monitored PT and cognitive therapy first. They want to ensure your symptoms are stable before clearing you for flight, but assuming everything goes well, you could be back in the air by spring. Thank you, sir. I don't know how to— You don't need to thank me, Captain. This is what should have happened from the beginning. The system failed you, and we're correcting that failure. Which brings me to my third point. The Pentagon has approved significant expansion of the Silent Emblem project. You'll have funding for 6 additional facilitators, partnerships with 5 more medical centers, and a direct line to SOCOM for referrals. This is becoming a model program. Chen sat down heavily. Sir, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified to lead something that large. I'm still figuring this out myself. That's exactly why you're qualified, Hendricks said firmly. You're not some career bureaucrat who's never experienced what these veterans are going through. You've lived it. You understand the frustration, the isolation, the feeling that you don't matter anymore. That authenticity is what makes this program work. After the call ended, Chen sat in silence, processing. Everything she'd thought was lost. Her identity as a pilot, her sense of purpose, her belief that her service mattered, was being rebuilt piece by piece, not in the same form as before, but in something potentially more meaningful. That evening, she drove to the beach and walked along the shoreline, watching the sun set over the Pacific. The vertigo that sometimes struck without warning was manageable today. The cognitive fatigue that made complex tasks exhausting was held at bay. For this moment, at least, she felt almost whole. Her phone buzzed with a text from Torres. Hey, Captain, just wanted to say thanks for today's session. The breathing exercises actually helped during a panic attack last night. First time I've been able to pull myself out of one without medication. Small victory, but it matters. Chen replied, It's not a small victory, David. It's huge. Proud of you. More texts came in from other group members. Updates, check-ins, small moments of progress in the ongoing battle with invisible wounds. Chen responded to each one, maintaining the connections that made this program work. She thought about the 12 pilots who'd earned Phoenix variant qualification, wondering how many of them had been discarded when they no longer fit the narrow definition of useful. She thought about the thousands of special operations personnel who'd sustained combat injuries and then faced a system that couldn't comprehend their unique challenges. She couldn't save all of them, but she could build build something that helped, something that ensured they weren't facing the bureaucratic nightmare alone. A month later, Chen stood on the flight line at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, helmet under her arm, wearing a flight suit for the first time in nearly a year. The medical board had accelerated her clearance after reviewing her progress in therapy and cognitive rehabilitation. She still had limitations: no night ops, restricted mission profiles, required monitoring, but she was cleared to fly. The AC-130 in front of her wasn't Widow 6-1. That aircraft had been retired after sustaining too much battle damage, but it was the same model, the same configuration, the same beautiful killing machine she'd spent years mastering. Commander Rodriguez appeared beside her, also in flight gear. "You ready for this?" "I don't know," Chen admitted. "What if I can't do it anymore? What if the symptoms kick in and I freeze up? Then we land, and we try again another day." "But Sarah, you were born to fly. That TBI changed some things, but it didn't change who you are fundamentally." Rodriguez bumped her shoulder. "Besides, I'm your WSO for this flight. I've got your back, just like I always have." They completed the pre-flight inspection together, going through each check with the familiar rhythm of countless missions. Chen's hands knew the motions even when her mind sometimes stuttered. Muscle memory carried her through the parts that conscious thought made difficult. As they climbed into the aircraft, Chen paused at the pilot's seat. This was the moment, the return to the identity she thought she'd lost forever. She settled into the seat, feeling the familiar contours, the way her hands fit naturally on the controls. The instrument panel glowed with information that her brain processed and categorized without conscious effort. This was home. Miramar Tower. "This is Warrior 3-4 requesting taxi clearance for local training flight," Rodriguez said into the radio. "Warrior 3-4, cleared to taxi runway 24 right." Chen advanced the throttles gently, feeling the aircraft respond. As they taxied toward the runway, she could feel her heart racing, but it wasn't panic. It was excitement, anticipation, the pure joy of doing what she was meant to do. "Warrior 3-4, you are cleared for takeoff." Chen pushed the throttles forward, feeling 4 massive turboprop engines surge to life. The AC-130 accelerated down the runway, gaining speed, the moment of rotation approaching. At the exact right moment, she pulled back gently on the yoke. The aircraft lifted smoothly into the sky. "Welcome back, Widow," Rodriguez said quietly on the internal comms. Chen blinked back tears, focusing on the instruments, on the pure mechanics of flight. Below her, San Diego spread out in the afternoon light, city and ocean and sky all coming together in the view that had defined her adult life. She was flying again. The training mission lasted 2 hours. Basic maneuvers, simulated attack runs against ground targets, coordination exercises with ground controllers. Chen's performance wasn't perfect. There were moments where the cognitive load felt overwhelming, where she had to consciously slow down and process information that used to flow automatically. But she completed every objective, executed every maneuver, and brought the aircraft back to Miramar with textbook precision. After landing, as they completed the post-flight inspection, Rodriguez pulled her aside. "That was good flying, Sarah. Really good. You're ready for this. I made mistakes. Processing delays on the second attack run, overcorrection during the steep turn. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is that you recognized them, compensated for them, and completed the mission safely. That's all anyone can ask." Rodriguez squeezed her shoulder. "You're back." 3 weeks later, Chen stood in front of a classroom full of new Marine pilots at the Weapons and Tactics Instructor course. She'd been assigned to teach advanced close air support tactics, specifically danger close operations and precision engagement in complex environments. "Good morning. I'm Captain Sarah Chen, and I'm going to be your primary instructor for this module. Before we start, I want to tell you about a mission from March 2023. She pulled up the tactical display showing Firebase Phoenix. This was a SEAL team extraction in Helmand province. Standard engagement protocols called for 100-meter minimum separation from friendlies. The tactical situation made that impossible, so the pilot on scene made a different call. She walked them through the mission, showing gun camera footage, tactical diagrams, and outcome metrics. The students watched in silence, some of them taking notes, others just staring at the screen. "That pilot was me," Chen said. "I broke every rule in the book. I violated direct orders. I put my career on the line. And I'd do it again tomorrow if faced with the same situation, because the alternative was watching Americans die." She let that sink in, then continued. "This course is going to teach you the technical skills for danger close operations, but more importantly, it's going to teach you judgment, how to assess when rules serve the mission and when they don't, how to calculate risk versus reward in real time, how to make decisions you can live with even when they cost you everything." One of the students, a young captain named Harris, raised his hand. Ma'am, what did it cost you? Chen pushed up her sleeve, showing the Phoenix variant tattoo and the scars from her injuries. I sustained a TBI during that mission, lost my combat flight status for almost a year, got assigned to process supply forms while my chain of command questioned whether I'd ever really been a combat pilot at all, faced a separation review that almost ended my career. She lowered her sleeve. But 381 people went home to their families. So when you ask what it cost me, my answer is not as much as following orders would have cost them. And that's a trade I'll make every single time. Harris nodded slowly. How did you get back here, ma'am? How did you keep going when everything was falling apart? Chen considered the question carefully. I didn't keep going alone. I had people who believed in me when I stopped believing in myself. I had a mission beyond flying, helping other veterans who were going through similar struggles, and eventually, I had leaders who recognized that capability matters more than compliance with regulations that don't serve their purpose. She pulled up the next slide. But here's what I want you to understand. The system will fail you sometimes. Leadership will fail you. The rules will fail you. What matters is how you respond to that failure. Do you give up? Do you become bitter? Or do you find a way to keep serving, keep contributing, keep making a difference, even when the path forward isn't clear? The classroom was silent. Every student focused on her words. This course is about more than tactics. It's about building the judgment and resilience you'll need when you face your own impossible decisions. So, let's get started. 6 months after the battalion formation at Camp Pendleton, Chen sat in Admiral Hendricks' office at the Pentagon. She'd been called to D.C. for a program review, but the Admiral had asked to meet privately first. Sarah, I wanted to show you something, Hendricks said, pulling up a document on his computer. This is the latest data from the Silent Emblem project. Since launch, you've served 412 veterans across all service branches. Of those, 298 have successfully navigated the VA system to receive appropriate care and benefits. 89 have returned to some form of active or reserve duty. 67 have transitioned to civilian careers with proper support. And 3, including yourself, have returned to flight status. He turned the screen so she could see the statistics. More significantly, we're seeing a 73% reduction in suicide ideation among program participants compared to control groups. That's unprecedented, Sarah. You're saving lives in a different way than you did over Helmand, but you're still saving lives. Chen studied the numbers, feeling something shift in her chest. Sir, I couldn't have done this alone. Commander Rodriguez, the peer facilitators, the medical staff at UCSD, the IG investigators who took our documentation seriously. This is a team effort. Of course it is, but you built the team. You created the framework. You fought through bureaucratic resistance and funding battles and people who insisted the existing system was fine. Hendricks leaned back in his chair. I've seen a lot of officers in my career, Sarah. Most of them are competent. Many are courageous, but very few have the combination of technical excellence, moral courage, and genuine compassion that you've demonstrated. That's rare. Thank you, sir. I'm not telling you this to inflate your ego. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand what you've built here. The Silent Emblem project isn't just a program. It's becoming a model for how we should treat all transitioning special operations personnel. SOCOM is looking at implementing similar initiatives across all commands. The VA is overhauling their verification processes based on your recommendations. You've created systemic change. He pulled out another folder, which brings me to the real reason I asked you here. Your Distinguished Flying Cross was approved. The ceremony is scheduled for next month at the White House. The president specifically requested to present it personally. Chen felt her breath catch. Sir, there's more. You're also being promoted to major, effective immediately, and I want to offer you a position on my staff, coordinating veteran transition programs across all naval special warfare components. It would mean leaving your teaching position at Miramar, leaving Southern California, and taking on a much more bureaucratic role, but you'd have the authority and resources to expand what you've started with Silent Emblem across the entire Department of Defense. Chen sat in silence, processing. The opportunity was staggering. Everything she'd worked toward. The chance to create real systemic change for thousands of veterans who'd faced the same struggles she had. But it also meant stepping away from flying, from the classroom where she was teaching young pilots the judgment and skills they'd need in combat. Sir, can I have some time to think about this? Of course. Take 2 weeks. Talk to Rodriguez. Talk to your peer facilitators. Talk to whoever you need to consult. This is a major decision, and I want you to make it with full understanding of what you'd be taking on. Chen nodded. There's something I need to say, though. When I was sitting in that logistics office processing supply forms, I thought my career was over. I thought everything I'd worked for was gone. I was wrong. wrong. Not because the system suddenly worked, but because you personally intervened. How many other people like me are out there right now being discarded with no Admiral Hendricks to ask the right questions? Too many, Hendricks admitted, which is why we need people like you in positions where they can fix the system from within. One intervention at a time isn't sustainable. We need structural change. That's exactly what worries me, sir. If I take this Pentagon position, I become part of the bureaucracy. I get pulled into meetings and budget committees and policy reviews. Meanwhile, there are veterans right now who need immediate help navigating the system, who need someone who understands what they're going through because I've been there. If I leave that frontline work, who fills that gap? Hendricks considered this carefully. You're not wrong, but you're also thinking too small. Right now, you're helping hundreds of people directly. From the Pentagon, you could create systems that help tens of thousands indirectly. Both approaches matter, but one has larger scale impact. I understand that, sir. I need to make sure I'm not abandoning the mission for a promotion. That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes you the right person for this job, Hendricks said. Take your 2 weeks. Think it through. And Sarah, whatever you decide, you have my full support. Chen left the Pentagon and walked through Washington, D.C., her mind churning. She found herself at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, standing among the names carved into black granite. Thousands of lives, each one representing someone who'd served and sacrificed. Her phone rang. Rodriguez. Hey, heard you're in D.C. How'd the meeting go? He offered me a promotion and a Pentagon position, coordinating veteran transition programs across all of DoD. Rodriguez whistled. That's huge. Congratulations. I haven't accepted yet. Why not? Because I'd have to leave the flying, leave the teaching, leave the direct work with veterans, and I'm not sure I'm ready to give that up. I just got it back. There was a long pause. Sarah, can I be honest with you? Always. You're thinking about this wrong. You're not choosing between helping people and advancing your career. You're choosing between helping some people directly and helping many more people systemically. Neither choice is wrong, but one has potential for much greater impact. I know, but you're scared, Rodriguez interrupted gently. You're scared that if you stop doing the hands-on work, you'll lose the connection to what makes it meaningful. You're scared of becoming just another Pentagon bureaucrat who's forgotten what it's like on the ground. Chen leaned against the memorial wall. Yes, exactly that. Then don't become that. Bring the same approach to the Pentagon that you brought to Silent Emblem. Stay connected to the veterans you're serving. Fight the bureaucracy from within, the same way you fought your way back into the cockpit. You've already proven you can do it. What about the teaching? I'm finally getting to pass on the lessons I learned. If I leave now, someone else will teach CAS tactics, Sarah. Probably very well. But who else can create the structural changes you're proposing? Who else has the combination of combat credibility, bureaucratic navigation skills, and personal experience with the system's failures? You're uniquely positioned to do this work. Don't waste that position because you're comfortable where you are. Chen closed her eyes, feeling the truth of Rodriguez's words settle into her bones. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best pilot I ever flew with. She taught me that sometimes you have to break the rules to serve the mission. Sounds like it's time to apply that lesson again. That evening, Chen had dinner with 3 members of her Silent Emblem group who happened to be in D.C. for medical appointments. David Torres, Jennifer Marks, and a Navy SEAL named Marcus Williams sat around a table at a small restaurant near Capitol Hill. So you're thinking about leaving us for a Pentagon gig? Torres said, his tone carefully neutral. I'm thinking about it. Haven't decided. What's holding you back? Marks asked. Chen picked at her food. Honestly, I'm worried about losing touch with what makes this work. The Silent Emblem project works because it's peer-to-peer, veteran to veteran. If I'm in some Pentagon office, how do I maintain that connection? Williams, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. Captain, I was at Firebase Phoenix, 3rd SEAL Team, 2nd Chalk during the extraction. I watched you thread 30mm rounds between our positions with maybe 20 meters clearance. I watched you take fire and keep flying. I watched you make an impossible call and execute it perfectly. He leaned forward. You want to know what I remember most? It wasn't the technical skill, though that was incredible. It was that you understood what was at stake. You saw us, really saw us, as people whose lives mattered more than your career or your adherence to regulations. That understanding is what made you willing to risk everything. I don't see how that applies to. It applies because you're doing the same thing now. You're seeing veterans who are struggling, who are being failed by the system, and you're asking yourself what you can risk to help them. The answer is, you can risk comfort. You can risk the direct satisfaction of hands-on work. You can risk becoming a bureaucrat if it means creating systems that help more people. Marks nodded. Marcus is right. You've already built the framework for Silent Emblem. You've trained peer facilitators who can carry on the day-to-day work. What we need now isn't another facilitator. We need someone fighting at the policy level to ensure this program gets the funding, support, and institutional backing it needs to survive long-term," Torres added. "And yeah, you might become more removed from the daily work. You might end up in meetings that feel meaningless. But you'll also be in the room when decisions get made about how we treat wounded warriors. You'll have the authority to push back when bureaucrats try to gut programs that actually work. That matters, Captain." Chen looked around the table at these 3 veterans she'd helped, who were now helping her see clearly. "You all think I should take it. We think you should do what you believe is right," Williams said. "But we also think you're the kind of leader who always puts mission first. And the mission right now isn't just helping the veterans you can reach directly. It's building systems that help all of them." The next morning, Chen visited Arlington National Cemetery. She walked among the white headstones, thinking about sacrifice and service, about the different ways people gave of themselves for something larger than their individual lives. She found herself at the tomb of the unknown soldier, watching the sentinel's precise march, back and forth, 21 steps in each direction, maintaining the vigil regardless of weather or circumstance. There was something powerful in that dedication, the willingness to show up day after day for a duty that most people would never see or appreciate. Her phone buzzed with a text from Captain Maria Santos, the Air Force combat rescue officer who'd joined Silent Emblem 3 months ago. "Just got cleared to return to limited duty status. Starting training next week to become a CRO instructor. Never thought I'd get here. Thank you for showing me it was possible." Chen stared at the message, feeling something crystallize in her mind. This was why the Pentagon position mattered. Every structural change she could implement, every policy reform she could push through, every barrier she could remove, it all multiplied the number of veterans who'd get messages like this, who'd find their way back to purpose and meaning after their world fell apart. She called Admiral Hendricks. "Sir, I've made my decision. I'll take the position." "I'm glad to hear it, Major Chen. When can you start?" "After the DFC ceremony. I want to finish out the current training cycle at Miramar, ensure proper transition for my replacement, and brief my peer facilitators on what comes next. Give me 6 weeks. Acceptable. I'll have orders cut for transfer to my staff effective mid-September. And Sarah, you're making the right choice." "I hope so, sir." The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Chen completed her teaching commitment at Miramar, passing on everything she'd learned about danger-close operations and tactical judgment to the next generation of pilots. She conducted an intensive training program for the Silent Emblem peer facilitators, ensuring they had the tools and knowledge to carry on without her direct involvement. She also had uncomfortable conversations with veterans who felt she was abandoning them by moving to the Pentagon. David Torres was particularly vocal about his concerns. "You're leaving just when we need you most," he said during a group session. "This program works because you understand us. How is some Pentagon bureaucrat going to replace that?" "I'm not being replaced," Chen said firmly. "The peer facilitators will continue the day-to-day work. I'll still be available for consultation and support. But from the Pentagon, I can fight for funding, for policy changes, for institutional backing that ensures this program survives and expands. That's work I can't do from here. It feels like you're choosing career advancement over us." Chen understood the anger behind his words. She'd felt abandoned enough times to recognize it in others. "David, I'm going to tell you something I learned the hard way. Taking care of people doesn't always mean being present for every session, every crisis, every moment they need support. Sometimes it means building systems that provide that support even when you're not there. It means creating sustainability beyond any single person." She paused, making sure she had everyone's attention. "This group will continue. The program will continue. And I'll be fighting at a level where I can ensure it has the resources and institutional protection it needs to help thousands more veterans beyond the ones in this room. That's not abandonment. That's scaling impact." The group was quiet for a long moment. Then Jennifer Marks spoke up. "She's right. We've been lucky to have Captain Chen's direct involvement, but the program was always supposed to be bigger than one person. If she can create policy changes that help veterans across DoD, that's more important than her being here for every group session." Torres looked unconvinced but didn't argue further. On Chen's last day at Miramar, Commander Rodriguez organized a small gathering at the O Club. Pilots from the CAS training course, peer facilitators from Silent Emblem, and several members of the base command team showed up to wish her well. "Speech!" someone called out. Chen stood reluctantly. "I'm not good at speeches," says the woman who stood in front of an entire battalion and made half of them cry. Rodriguez interjected. Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Okay, fine." Chen took a breath. "A year ago, I was sitting in a logistics office, processing supply requisitions, convinced my career was over and my service didn't matter anymore. I'd lost my flight status, lost my sense of purpose, and was slowly losing myself. The only thing keeping me going was stubbornness and the faint hope that maybe, somehow, things would get better." She looked around the room. "They got better because people refused to let me disappear." Admiral Hendricks asked questions when others were content with easy answers. Lisa Rodriguez kept checking on me when I pushed her away. The SEAL team operators who'd been at Firebase Phoenix spoke up about what really happened that night. And later, when I started building Silent Emblem, veterans trusted me with their stories and their struggles, letting me help even when they had every reason to be skeptical. Her voice strengthened. "None of us gets through this alone. Not combat, not transition, not the invisible wounds we carry. We survive because we take care of each other, because we refuse to let people fall through the cracks, because we understand that service doesn't end when you leave the battlefield. It just changes form." She raised her glass. "I'm heading to the Pentagon to fight bureaucratic battles instead of flying combat missions. It's not what I would have chosen a year ago, but it's where I'm needed now. So here's to all of you, the pilots who will keep training the next generation, the facilitators who will keep running Silent Emblem, the veterans who will keep showing up and doing the hard work of healing. You're the ones who matter. You're the ones making the difference, and I'm honored to have served alongside you." The room erupted in applause. People came up afterward to shake her hand, offer encouragement, share their own stories. It was after 2200 when Chen finally left the O Club, exhausted but satisfied. Rodriguez walked her to her car. "You're going to be great at this, you know." "I hope so. The thought of Pentagon politics makes me want to jump out of an aircraft without a parachute. Good thing you're Phoenix variant qualified. You've survived worse than bureaucracy." They stood in the parking lot, the ocean breeze carrying salt air and the distant sound of aircraft. "Lisa, I need to tell you something," Chen said. "That night over Helmand, when the hydraulic line ruptured and I got hit, there was a moment where I thought I was done. Couldn't see clearly, couldn't hear right, couldn't feel my left hand. I almost told you to take over." "Why didn't you?" "Because I looked at the thermal display and saw all those people depending on us, saw the enemy positions we still had to clear, calculated that the mission required another 30 minutes of flying, and if I gave up the controls, we might not have 30 minutes. So I just kept flying, ignored everything my body was telling me and focused on the mission." Rodriguez's eyes were wet. "You never told me that." "I couldn't. Admitting I'd flown while seriously impaired would have ended my career even faster, but it's haunted me ever since, wondering if I made the right call, whether I was being brave or just stupid." "You saved 381 lives, Sarah. That's the right call by any measure. Maybe, but it cost me almost everything. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, I understand now that sometimes the right call costs you. Sometimes doing what needs to be done means sacrificing what you want most. I made that choice over Helmand, and I'm making it again now, leaving the flying and the direct work for policy battles and bureaucratic warfare." She looked at Rodriguez. "Just promise me something. If you see me losing sight of why this matters, if the Pentagon turns me into someone who cares more about process than people, you'll tell me. You'll call me out. I promise. But Sarah, you won't lose sight. It's not in your nature. You're hardwired to see people, to care about the mission beyond the paperwork. That's not going to change just because you're wearing a Pentagon badge." They hugged, and Chen drove off base for the last time as a Miramar instructor. 3 weeks later, Chen stood in the East Room of the White House, wearing her dress blues with every ribbon and decoration properly aligned. Her parents were there, flown in from California. Rodriguez was there. Admiral Hendricks was there. And standing in front of her was the President of the United States, holding a distinguished flying cross. Major Sarah Chen," the president began, reading from prepared remarks but making frequent eye contact. "On March 15, 2023, you made a decision that exemplified the finest traditions of military service. Faced with an impossible situation, you chose to risk everything, your aircraft, your career, your life, to save your fellow service members. The precision and courage you demonstrated that night represents the very best of American military aviation." The president pinned the medal to her uniform. "But what makes your story particularly compelling is what came after. You sustained serious combat injuries. You lost your flight status. You were assigned to work that didn't match your capabilities. And instead of becoming bitter or defeated, you recognized that other veterans were facing similar struggles. You built a program that's now helping hundreds of people transition successfully after combat injuries. He stepped back. You've demonstrated that heroism isn't just about one moment of courage under fire. It's about sustained commitment to service even when the path forward isn't clear. It's about refusing to let others fall through the cracks because you remember what it felt like to fall through them yourself. Major Chen, on behalf of a grateful nation, thank you for your service. The room erupted in applause. Chen saluted crisply, blinking back tears, feeling the weight of the medal on her chest and the weight of everything it represented. Afterward, at the reception, she was surrounded by well-wishers. Her father, a retired Army colonel, pulled her aside. I'm proud of you, honey. Not just for the medal, though that's significant, but for how you handled everything that came after. Lesser people would have quit. I almost did quit, Dad. There were days when I couldn't see any reason to keep going. But you didn't quit. That's what matters. He squeezed her shoulder. Your mother and I always knew you were strong. We just didn't realize how strong until we saw you rebuild after losing everything. Her mother joined them, tears streaming down her face. My daughter, the hero. Mom, I'm not. Yes, you are. You're a hero to those SEALs you saved. You're a hero to the veterans you're helping through your program. You're a hero to every woman who's been told she doesn't belong in combat roles. Don't diminish that. Chen hugged her mother tightly, letting herself feel the emotion she'd been holding back during the ceremony. The next morning, she reported to the Pentagon for her first day as part of Admiral Hendricks' staff. Her office was small but functional, with a window overlooking the Potomac River. The walls were bare. She'd need to decide what to put up, how to make this space feel like hers. Her first meeting was at 0900, budget review for veteran transition programs across all service branches. She walked into a conference room filled with senior officers and civilian administrators, most of whom barely glanced at her when she entered. The meeting was exactly as tedious as she'd feared. Arguments over funding allocations, debates about program effectiveness metrics, bureaucratic maneuvering to protect existing initiatives from cuts. Chen sat quietly, taking notes, learning the dynamics of the room. 40 minutes in, a Navy captain named Richardson was arguing for cutting funding to peer support programs in favor of expanding clinical services. We have perfectly good mental health providers at VA facilities. We don't need to fund these touchy-feely peer groups that lack clinical oversight. Chen cleared her throat. Excuse me, Captain Richardson, but have you reviewed the suicide ideation data for peer support participants versus traditional clinical pathways? Richardson looked at her with barely concealed irritation. I'm sorry, who are you? Major Sarah Chen, newly assigned to Admiral Hendricks' staff. I developed the Silent Emblem Project, one of the peer support programs you're proposing to cut, and the data shows a 73% reduction in suicide ideation among participants compared to control groups receiving only traditional clinical care. That's not touchy-feely. That's life-saving effectiveness. Clinical care is evidence-based, so is peer support, Chen interrupted. Veterans dealing with classified operations, with combat injuries that civilian providers don't understand, with unique stressors from special operations work, they need people who've been there. Clinical care is important, but it's not sufficient by itself. The data proves this. She pulled up a slide on her tablet and mirrored it to the conference room screen. Here's the breakdown. Veterans in combined peer support and clinical care showed better outcomes across every metric: treatment adherence, symptom management, social reintegration, and return to work rates. Cutting peer support funding doesn't strengthen clinical care. It removes a critical component of effective treatment. The room was silent. Richardson looked like he wanted to argue, but couldn't refute the data. Admiral Hendricks, who'd been sitting quietly at the head of the table, spoke up. Major Chen makes a compelling point. I'd like to see revised budget proposals that maintain current peer support funding while we evaluate these effectiveness metrics more thoroughly. Anyone object? No one did, though Richardson looked unhappy. After the meeting, Hendricks caught up with Chen in the hallway. Good work in there. You've got the data to back up your positions, and you're not afraid to speak up. That's what I need on my staff. Thank you, sir, though I think I just made an enemy. Richardson will get over it, or he won't, and he'll find himself working on less important projects. Either way, you did the right thing. Hendricks handed her a folder. This is your next assignment. Joint Chiefs want a comprehensive review of transition protocols for special operations personnel across all branches. They're specifically interested in whether current medical retirement processes adequately account for classified work. I want you to lead it. Chen opened the folder, scanning the project scope. This was big, exactly the kind of systemic review that could create meaningful change for thousands of veterans. When do you need the preliminary report? 4 months. But Chen, I want you to understand something. This review is going to step on toes. You'll be challenging established processes, questioning decisions that senior officers made years ago, potentially uncovering failures that people would prefer stay buried. Are you ready for that? Chen thought about Firebase Phoenix, about the moment she'd decided to violate engagement protocols despite knowing it would cost her career, about the choice between following rules and saving lives. Sir, I've already sacrificed everything once for what I believed was right. Comparatively speaking, upsetting some Pentagon bureaucrats doesn't scare me much. Hendricks smiled. That's what I thought you'd say. Get started. Over the next 4 months, Chen threw herself into the review with the same intensity she'd once applied to combat flying. She interviewed hundreds of veterans, reviewed medical retirement files, analyzed data on transition outcomes, and documented systemic failures in how special operations personnel were processed out of service. What she found was damning. Veterans with classified clearances were being medically retired with records so heavily redacted that VA couldn't verify their service. Special operations skill sets weren't being properly evaluated for civilian translation. TBI and PTSD were being underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed due to lack of provider understanding of special operations culture. And most significantly, there was no standardized protocol for managing the transition of personnel whose injuries prevented them from continuing in their current role, but who still had significant capability for other forms of service. She'd effectively been researching her own story, multiplied across thousands of veterans. The preliminary report was brutal in its assessment. Current medical retirement protocols for special operations personnel are fundamentally inadequate. They treat retirement as a binary decision. Either you're fully fit for duty or you're completely separated, when reality is far more nuanced. Veterans with significant limitations in one area may be perfectly capable in others, but existing systems lack the flexibility to accommodate this reality. The result is that highly skilled, extensively trained personnel are being lost to service entirely when they could continue contributing in modified roles. Chen's recommendations were equally direct. Create a Special Operations Transition Review Board with authority to evaluate personnel for alternative assignments rather than automatic separation. Establish secure protocols for VA verification of classified service without compromising operational security. Mandate specialized training for VA providers treating special operations personnel. Fund expanded peer support programs and create a tracking system to monitor long-term outcomes for medically retired special operations veterans. She submitted the report to Admiral Hendricks on a Friday afternoon, then went home to her small apartment in Arlington and collapsed on the couch, emotionally and physically exhausted. Her phone rang. Admiral Hendricks. Major Chen, I just finished reading your report. It's excellent work. Thorough, well documented, and unflinching in its assessment of current failures. Thank you, sir. It's also going to cause a shitstorm. You've essentially accused multiple service branches of systematically failing their special operations personnel. People are going to push back hard. I expected that, sir. Good, because the Joint Chiefs want to brief them next week. You'll be presenting directly to the chairman and the service chiefs. This is your chance to make the case for why these changes are necessary. Don't hold back. After hanging up, Chen sat in the darkness of her apartment, thinking about the weight of what she was about to do. This wasn't like flying combat missions where the enemies were clear and the objectives straightforward. This was navigating Pentagon politics, challenging institutional inertia, pushing for changes that would require people to admit they'd failed. But then she thought about Captain Maria Santos, who'd almost been medically separated despite being capable of instructing future combat rescue officers. She thought about David Torres, who'd struggled for months to get appropriate treatment for his PTSD because VA providers didn't understand special operations culture. She thought about the hundreds of Silent Emblem participants who'd been lost in the system until someone finally helped them navigate it. She thought about herself, sitting in that logistics office, processing supply forms, slowly disappearing. This was why she'd taken the Pentagon position. This was the mission. 1 week later, Major Sarah Chen stood in the tank, the secure conference room where the Joint Chiefs of Staff met to discuss matters of national security, and presented her findings to the most senior military leadership in the United States. She walked them through the data, the case studies, the systemic failures, and her proposed solutions. The reaction was mixed. fast. The Army Chief of Staff challenged her methodology. The Air Force Chief questioned the cost of implementation. The Commandant of the Marine Corps, her own service's senior officer, wanted to know why she thought existing programs were insufficient. Chen answered each objection with data, with specific examples, with the cold hard math of how many veterans were being failed by the current system. Finally, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, a 4-star Army general named Martinez, spoke up. Major Chen, you've made a compelling case that we're failing our special operations personnel during transition. What you haven't addressed is why we should trust that your proposed solutions will actually work better than what we're currently doing. When Chen met his eyes directly. Sir, with respect, I'm not asking you to trust my theoretical solutions. I'm asking you to look at actual outcomes. The Silent Emblem project has demonstrated effectiveness across multiple metrics. The veterans who've gone through that program have better transition outcomes than comparable groups who didn't. That's not theory. That's documented reality. She advanced to her next slide. But more fundamentally, sir, the current system isn't just ineffective. It's actively harmful. When we take people who've spent years in the most demanding military roles, who've operated at the highest levels of capability, and we tell them they're suddenly worthless because they sustained an injury, we're not just failing them administratively. We're destroying them psychologically. Her voice intensified. I know this because I lived it. I went from being a Phoenix variant qualified AC-130 pilot to processing supply requisitions while my chain of command questioned whether I'd ever really been in combat. I know what it feels like to have your service dismissed, your capabilities ignored, your identity erased, and I know I'm not unique. There are thousands of veterans experiencing that same slow destruction right now because our systems are broken. The room was silent. Chen pressed on. You want to know why you should trust my solutions? Because they're built on lived experience, validated by data, and designed by people who actually understand what special operations veterans need. Because the alternative, continuing with systems that demonstrably don't work, is unconscionable. Because we owe these people more than bureaucratic indifference. General Martinez studied her for a long moment. Then he looked around the table at the other service chiefs. I've heard enough. Major Chen's report is compelling. Her recommendations are sound, and the data supports immediate action. I'm directing all service branches to begin implementation of these protocols within 90 days. Admiral Hendricks, work with Major Chen to develop detailed implementation plans for each service. We'll reconvene in 6 months to review progress. He looked directly at Chen. Major, you've done important work here. Don't stop now. As the meeting adjourned, Chen felt something settle into place. This was the impact she'd been seeking. Not individual interventions, but systemic change that would help thousands of veterans she'd never meet, fighting battles she'd never see. Admiral Hendricks caught up with her outside the tank. That was gutsy, bringing your personal experience into it. Was it inappropriate, sir? No, it was exactly right. These generals needed to understand this isn't academic. It's personal. You made them see that. He paused. You're developing into an exceptional leader, Sarah. You know that? I'm just trying to make sure others don't go through what I did, sir. That's what makes you exceptional. You're not motivated by ego or career advancement. You're motivated by genuine desire to fix a broken system. Don't lose that. 6 months later, Chen stood at a podium during a ceremony at Joint Base Andrews. The Silent Emblem project had been officially expanded to all service branches, with dedicated funding and institutional backing from the Joint Chiefs. She was being recognized as the program's founder and receiving the Defense Superior Service Medal for her work developing transition protocols for special operations personnel. But what mattered most to her wasn't the medal or the recognition. It was the email she'd received that morning from a Marine she'd never met, a combat-wounded sniper who'd been facing medical separation until the new transition protocols gave him a path to continue serving as a marksmanship instructor. Major Chen, you don't know me, but I wanted to thank you. I was 3 weeks from separation. No plan, no hope. Convinced my service didn't matter anymore because I couldn't deploy again. Then the new transition board evaluated me and found a role where I can still contribute. I'm going to be training scout snipers at Camp Lejeune. I get to keep serving, keep mattering. Thank you for fighting for people like me. Chen read it twice, then forwarded it to Admiral Hendricks with a simple note. This is why it matters. His response came within minutes. Proud of you, Major. Keep fighting. That evening, Chen went for a run along the Potomac, the same route she'd been running since arriving in D.C. Her pace was steady, her breathing controlled. The vertigo that sometimes struck was held at bay. The TBI symptoms were still there, would always be there, but she'd learned to work around them, to compensate, to function despite the limitations. She thought about the journey from that logistics office at Camp Pendleton to this moment, about Admiral Hendricks asking questions that others ignored, about Rodriguez refusing to let her disappear, about the SEAL operators who'd spoken up about what really happened at Firebase Phoenix. She thought about the choice she'd made over Helmand province, violating protocol to save lives, knowing it would cost her everything she'd worked for. She'd make that choice again tomorrow. And she was making similar choices now, fighting different battles, taking different risks, but always driven by the same fundamental commitment to serve, to protect, to ensure that people who'd sacrificed for their country weren't abandoned by the systems that were supposed to take care of them. Her phone buzzed. A text from Captain Maria Santos, just got promoted to Major, starting a new transition program for Air Force Special Operations, using your model. Want to collaborate? Chen smiled and typed back, absolutely. Let's talk this week. The work would never be finished. There would always be more veterans to help, more systems to fix, more battles to fight. But for the first time since that night over Helmand province, Chen felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. She was still flying, in a sense, just in a different way, toward a different objective, but with the same precision and commitment she'd always brought to the mission. And 381 people, plus thousands more she'd helped since, were proof that it mattered. Chen finished her run and headed home, already thinking about tomorrow's challenges, tomorrow's fights, tomorrow's opportunities to make the system work better for the people who'd given everything for their country. The mission continued. It always would. Epilogue, 3 to 4 minutes. 5 years later, Major, now Lieutenant Colonel, Sarah Chen sat in the cockpit of an AC-130 for the first time in years, not as the pilot, but as an observer for a training mission. The new generation of pilots were running danger-close scenarios, executing the kind of precision strikes she'd once specialized in. She watched them work, noting the improvements in technology, the refinements in tactics, the lessons learned and passed down through successive classes. Some of those lessons came from her, from the curriculum she'd developed, from the doctrine she'd helped write. The pilot, a young captain named Jackson, executed a perfect gun run at 30 meters from simulated friendly forces. Clean, precise, by the book. "How'd I do, ma'am?" Jackson asked over the intercom. "Perfect execution, Captain. But let me ask you something. What if the tactical situation required you to go closer? What if 30 meters wasn't close enough?" Jackson hesitated. "The regulations specify." "I know what the regulations specify. I wrote some of them. But regulations exist to serve the mission, not the other way around. What matters is judgment, understanding when rules work and when they don't. That's what I want you thinking about. Not just how to execute the standard solution, but how to recognize when the situation requires something different." She could see him processing that, trying to reconcile it with everything he'd been taught about following procedures. "The difference between good pilots and exceptional ones isn't technical skill," Chen continued. "It's the ability to make impossible decisions under pressure and live with the consequences. Some of you will face those decisions someday. When you do, I want you to be ready." The flight continued, and Chen found herself smiling despite the bittersweet nature of being back in the aircraft as an observer rather than the pilot. She could still feel the pull of it, the desire to have her hands on the controls, to execute the maneuvers herself rather than watch others do it. But this was enough. Teaching, mentoring, passing on hard-won lessons to people who'd carry them into future battles. This mattered too. After the flight, Rodriguez met her on the flight line. They'd both made lieutenant colonel now. Rodriguez still flying combat missions, while Chen worked primarily in policy and program development. "Miss it?" Rodriguez asked, watching Chen's face as another AC-130 took off. "Every day, but I'm where I need to be. You've helped thousands of people, Sarah. The Silent Emblem Project, the transition protocols, the training curriculum. That's a legacy that goes way beyond any single mission." Chen nodded. "I know, but there's still a part of me that wants to be up there, executing the missions rather than writing policies about them. That's what made you a great pilot, and it's what makes you an effective advocate now. You never forget what it's really about." Rodriguez bumped her shoulder. "Besides, you're doing something more important than flying. You're making sure that when people like us get hurt, when we can't do the job anymore in the way we used to, we don't get thrown away. That matters more than any single mission." "Thanks, Lisa." They stood together in the afternoon sun, watching aircraft craft come and go, both of them connected to this world even as their roles within it continued to evolve. Chen's phone rang. It was one of her silent emblem facilitators, calling about a new veteran who needed immediate support. She answered it, already shifting into problem-solving mode, already thinking about resources and connections and how to help this person navigate the system that had once nearly destroyed her. The mission continued. It always would. But now, at least, she wasn't fighting it alone, and neither were the thousands of veterans she'd helped build support systems for. That night, Chen sat at her desk in her home office, working on a briefing for the Secretary of Defense about expanding transition programs to include more comprehensive mental health support. It was dry, bureaucratic work, memos and budget projections and policy recommendations, but she approached it with the same intensity she'd once brought to calculating firing solutions under enemy fire, because this mattered too. Every policy change that made the system work better, every dollar of funding secured for veteran programs, every barrier removed from the path of someone trying to transition after combat injuries, it all added up. It all made a difference. Her father called as she was finishing the briefing. "Hey, honey, just checking in. How are you doing?" "Good, Dad. Busy, but good. Working on a new initiative to improve mental health support for transitioning special operations personnel." "You never stop, do you?" Chen smiled. "Learned it from you, Dad. Finished the mission. I'm proud of you. I know I've said it before, but I need to say it again. What you've built, what you've accomplished, it's remarkable." "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." After they hung up, Chen pulled out an old photograph from her desk drawer. It showed her standing in front of Widow 6-1, flight suit on, helmet under her arm, Rodriguez beside her. Both of them were smiling, exhausted but satisfied after a successful mission. She studied the photo, remembering who she'd been then, confident, capable, certain of her place in the world. Then she looked at her reflection in the window, seeing who she'd become, scarred but wiser, limited but adaptive, forever changed by the choices she'd made. Both versions were real. Both mattered. She put the photo back in the drawer and returned to her briefing, working late into the night because there was always more to do, always another veteran who needed help, always another fight worth fighting. The mission continued, and Sarah Chen, who'd once saved 381 lives in a single night by breaking every rule in the book, was still saving lives, just in different ways, with different tools, fighting different battles, but always serving, always committed, always determined to make sure that the people who gave everything for their country weren't forgotten or discarded when they could no longer serve in the ways they once had. That was the mission that mattered most, and she'd keep fighting it until there was nothing left to fight for.